Polito, Chimichukma, Yakoki, Shata Hatak, Ain't Blasia. Greetings to you. I am Victor Burning Fire, Aboriginal Indigenous Chata man.
Polito, Chimichukma, Yakoki, Shata Ohoyo, Tinkbasia. Greetings to you. I am Nura Sunlight, Aboriginal Indigenous Chata woman.
We thank you for joining us.
Aside from our greetings of Halito from the Chata Nation, we also respectfully greet a few of our other indigenous nations, since this video goes out to all indigenous nations of Turtle Island, aka North America place name, Talaji or Cherokee, Oseo, Sioux, Han to the sisters, and How to our brothers, the Navajo, Yat-e, meaning it is good, and to the Issa Chata or Cree, Hinchke. As usual, we will use the animated voice for clarity and better comprehension.
An X mark is a European treaty contract signature construct that was unknown of before the foreign European invasion. During the 18th and 19th centuries, it was a common practice for European colonizer treaty commissioners to have their American Indian fiction agents make X marks to signify presence and agreement. These Indian agents were the ones that assimilated to become civilized as Indians in the white man's ways. The colonizing whites required their fabricated Indian fictions to abandon their indigenous ways of tradition, government, spirituality, converting to Christianity. They were mandated compulsive schooling for the indoctrination of their children in Christian schools. And they were required to intermarry with the whites, which is why today, many of these artificial indigenous people and so-called $5 American Indians, Native Americans, etc., are so white, bearing absolutely no resemblance to the ancestors. Lands were stolen, and the people were dominated by Europeans using practices such as miscegenation. Miscegenation is Roman and Judeo-Christian sanctioned rape of Aboriginal Indigenous women. Their intent was to destroy the bloodline inheritance of matrilineal cultures, as instructed by the Roman Catholic Church. Matrilineal pertains to, or descended from, the mother's side. The colonizers needed to secure themselves as heirs to the land, by deliberately mixing sexually, to bear offspring, with, or forcefully without, consent, of the Aborigine. This diabolical Christian way is evidenced in their own, King James Bible book, called, Deuteronomy 21:10-13, which reads, quote, 10. When thou goest forth to war against thine enemies, and the Lord thy God hath delivered them into thine hands, and thou hast taken them captive, 11. And seest among the captives a beautiful woman, and hast a desire unto her, that thou wouldest have her to thy wife, 12. Then thou shalt bring her home to thine house, and she shall shave her head, and pare her nails, 13. And she shall put the raiment of her captivity from off her, and shall remain in thine house, and bewail her father and her mother a full month, and after that thou shalt go in unto her, and be her husband, and she shall be thy wife.
Cultural appropriation is the inappropriate or unacknowledged adoption of an element or elements of one culture or identity by members of another culture and identity. Meaning, to take or steal something for one's own use, typically without the owner's permission. Such as, colonizing European white people, as they call themselves, stealing and taking as their own, the customary habits, social forms, and material traits of Aboriginal Indigenous groups. Also, stealing the characteristic features of everyday existence or a way of life shared by Aboriginal Indigenous peoples in a place or time. This is especially controversial and damaging when members of a foreign European dominant culture appropriate, meaning to steal, from colonized Indigenous peoples and their cultures. Cultural appropriators are also usurpers. Meaning, by force, they take the power of an established region for themselves, without any lawful authority to claim it as one's own. One good example is what you are witnessing on this video. White washing.
The clans and tribes that rejected and revolted European assimilation were systematically kept in isolation from the colonizers, through the process of segregation until the time of Martin Luther King Jr. Segregation is the systematic separation of people into racial, or by other ethnic groups, or blood quantums, in daily life.
All the races will go back to their homeland.
Well, where do whites go? This used to belong
Whites
to
stay here, New Jerusalem, America.
Excuse me, whites stay in New Jersey?
New Jerusalem, the United States, New Jerusalem.
Okay, but the Native Americans, which we used to call Indians, they were here first. We have to get out.
100 years later, the Negro is still languished in the corners of American society and finds himself in exile in his own land.
Another major requirement of the European was that their Indians must participate in the human trafficking of slaves, thus separating from their Aboriginal Indigenous tribal members that refused to assimilate. As a result, the loss of their core essence, and another reason why today, true Aboriginal Indigenous should not try and join, or be recognized by these Indian tribes of the colonizing United States, for whom many are only grafted whites recognizing themselves as Indian fictions as to facilitate further Indigenous land theft. Their so-called Indian status must be renewed every 5 years. They are ruled and regulated by their master colonizers under the United States Bureau of Indian Affairs.
In fact, those that we call the 5 civilized tribes in the southeast United States, which were actually given that name due to their adoption of many European cultural values, to include centralized forms of representative government, conversion to Christianity, education and literacy, intermarriage with whites, and of course their participation in the ownership of black slaves. Much of this cultural assimilation was due to the belief by the tribes that if they acquiesced and adopted European methods, then they would not be persecuted themselves and pushed off their lands.
If we can't get them out, we feed them out. If we can't get them out, we feed them out. If we can't get them out, we feed them out.
These Indian agencies are now solely owned by the U.S. Bureau of Indian Affairs. Aborigine were coerced, then pressed an X mark on European-constructed treaty papers under conditions that were grossly harmful to our well-being, and intended to always include the foreign United States colony people into our lives. As a result, our ancestors protested, and revolted to the death because these European treaty contracts unavoidably led to dramatic changes in Aborigine life, caused conflict, enabled the loss of land, displacement, fictional private property boundary lines on ancestral communal lands, destroyed values, destroyed cultural and traditional self-governance. The Treaty X mark gave consent to U.S. assimilation policies that eventually led to widespread foreign occupation, foreign imposed supremacy and domination over us, along with legalized punishment and murder of indigenous peoples. The majority of our ancestors resisted, and still resist, till this very day. The European captors assigned our ancestors their so-called rights to withhold the X mark on the treaty paper. However, any perceived resistance to the mark resulted in great suffering, and/or the foreign legalized murder of clan and tribe members in the name of the Christian God. The X mark is just one of the true variations of the mark of the European beast till this day. An X mark is a sign of consent in a context of coercion, contamination and corruption to make an agreement with the foreign European U.S. conquerors of our land and people where there is little choice in the matter, but intended by the colonizers to secure the inclusion of these foreigners in our affairs. Before the invasion by the colonizing European pale-face whites, and their darker complexion Moorish rivals, that only look like us, there were no treaties. No need. No alphabetic writing, nor so-called signatures on paper. We, the Aborigine, had our own traditional ways of making formal agreements between our various clans and tribes. Look. People. Be aware of all treaties. They have the words, seed, or ceded land in them. C-E-D-E. Cede, or ceded means to give up, give away, or had given away our land to foreign colonizing parasites under threat, duress, and coercion, meaning, as a result of violence, threat, or other pressures against us, which is why we are consistently held down to this very day by any and all means that the foreign European American deems imaginable. Look. Listen good. Treaties between the colonizing Europeans and Aboriginal Indigenous of this land, that the United States settler operators and their descendants now occupy. Mind you, these treaties were never ever valid. Simply because there was no authority and no consent from the millions of Aboriginal Indigenous clans and tribes people having a say involved.
European colonization of the Americas resulted in some of the largest series of genocides in history. And if the colonizer U.S. Bureau of Indian Affairs website shows the truth, then they assert that there were 370 treaties ratified by their foreign U.S. Senate between 1778 and 1871, when the invaders ended with the Delawares Treaty. Also, study.com through the Bureau of Indian Affairs assert that before the invasion of Cristoforo Colombo, aka Christopher Columbus the Moor, there were over 1,000 indigenous nations. So, 370 X-marked treaties out of at least 100 million in populations of over 1,000 Aboriginal Indigenous tribes at North America alone, then 370 is 0.00037% or 37/100,000% of 100 million people, meaning an overwhelming majority in extremely large numbers of Aborigine. We were not even involved. We were not a part of the Europeans' bogus land giveaway treaties. These treaties were invalid from the beginning, must be rescinded, and lands returned, putting the Aboriginal Indigenous back in our positions as if these bogus treaty contracts had never existed.
However, pursued without regard for the other indigenous multitude. Under foreign U.S. military and political pressure and coercion, a handful of indigenous people undergoing assimilation, purportedly, gave away, or transferred, land and power by either sale or gift, to colonizing and treacherous United States operators. The United States foreign invaders, as well as the other colonizing Europeans that falsely claimed to own the lands, fabricated treaties without the consent of the millions of Aboriginal Indigenous peoples that they deemed unrecognized by them. However, these U.S. operators imposed unprincipled mass citizenship through their foreign collective naturalization scheme. This great wickedness and wrongdoing prompts indigenous demand for the lands to be returned. In addition, the expulsion of European immigrants, who now identify themselves as having legal American nationality. This American nationality fiction was adopted by colonizers under their own foreign United States colonial legal system of transplanted European culture, enforcing foreign laws against the Aborigine inhabitants they found when they invaded. European culprits, willfully and ethically indifferent, executed heinous acts, and causing the death of indigenous people in the name of their foreign Christian dogma, God, and the manifest destiny theory that white European immigrants were divinely ordained to invade and colonize the entire populated land of North America. Thereby, designing and implementing a variety of measures, means, and institutions, still in effect today, to remove and destroy the indigenous population. The U.S. operators had specific intent to deceive, lie, cheat, divide, dominate and deliberately commit massive genocidal killing to steal lands in the Americas against indigenous nations that rejected the foreign European invasion and culture. Revolting indigenous were deemed unrecognized by the U.S., while the Anglo-cultural assimilated indigenous were deemed recognized as U.S. civilized Indians, bound to miscegenation sex laws, the slave master requirement, and abandonment of indigenous cultures and values. In any case, the aim of the U.S. was to destroy Aboriginal indigenous nations, but without any desire for the consequences that result from such heinous actions. Again, treaties between the colonizing Europeans and Aboriginal indigenous of this land were never valid. The Aboriginal indigenous peoples of the North America place name demand the lands be returned along with the expulsion of Ellis Island European immigrants calling themselves American.
Like Palestine, under colonizer occupation of Israel, the Aboriginal Indigenous of this land, referred to as North American Native Place, we're under occupation of the colonizer, referred to as the United States, the United States colonies.
Israel is America. So let me be clear about what I believe. I stand with Israel because of our shared values, which are so fundamental to the founding of both our nations. Israeli violence is necessary to protect Israel from threats to its exceptional existence, just as American violence is necessary to protect the United States from threats to its exceptional existence.
Israeli police have attacked mourners and pallbearers at the funeral of the Palestinian-American journalist Shireen Abu Akleh in Jerusalem. The Al Jazeera reporter was shot in the head while covering a raid by Israeli forces in the occupied West Bank.
Israel's security forces had entered the hospital gates as Palestinians tried to walk the coffin out. The police fired stun grenades and pushed the crowd back. And even the pallbearers had to retreat, as police kicked and beat them with batons, and the coffin slipped to the ground. The force says it acted to stop what it called incitement and stone throwing.
How Israel is covered in the U.S. news and popular media serves to obscure the biggest thing that ties the United States and Israel together. They're both settler colonial states which have been built on the displacement and ethnic cleansing of other peoples.
Look. Notice this European trick in words used in their legalese, legal treaty documents. The colonizer used the word cede instead of sale, S-A-L-E, meaning available for purchase, intended to be sold, in their deceptive treaties. To cede is to give up, or give away. These foreign greedy materialistic parasitic bastards knew very well that by Aboriginal indigenous cultures and spirituality, that Earth Mother cannot be bought, sold, or given away, because she belongs to no one.
Brothers and sisters, I want to show in the colonizers' own documents what so many of us have misconceptions about, which is the Bureau of Indian Affairs, also known as Indian Affairs. The website description looks very good. It shows an emphasis on self-governance and self-determination, rights and prosperity. However, that's a bunch of bull. It's a foreign United States colonizer Indian fiction agency within their Department of the Interior, and that department controls the stolen minerals and lands that they call public. The operating colonizers of this agency also oversee the trust fictions that they set up for self-catering accommodations, which is achieved through their Indian tribe fiction constructs. So let's look at Indian Affairs, Volume 2, Laws and Treaties Manual, so we can see what is really in there. All right, we're going to replace the word ceded with giveaway or given away. Starting with the Shawnee. Article 2. The Shawnee Nation do acknowledge the United States to be the sole and absolute sovereigns of all the territory given to them by a treaty of peace made between them and the King of Great Britain. People, we must understand that the U.S., USA, whatever they want to call themselves, has always been Great Britain. On top of that, this bogus treaty was made up in 1786, 9 years after the U.S. colonizers supposedly declared their independence from Great Britain in 1777. Think about it. Just think about it. Next, we're dealing with the Wyandot, Delaware, Ottawa, and Chippewa nations. It says here, they do hereby acknowledge and confirm, and the undersigned Indians do hereby in their own names and the names of their respective nations and tribes, their heirs and descendants, for the consideration mentioned above, release, quit, claim, relinquish, and give away or give to the said United States all the land east, south, and west of the lines above described, so far as the said Indians formerly claimed the same. For them, the said United States to have and to hold the same in true and absolute propriety forever. Bullcrap. Look at these parasites. Just like the definition of the word American. A native of America, originally applied to the Aboriginals or copper-colored races found here by the Europeans, but now applied to the descendants of Europeans born in America. Noah Webster's 1828 Dictionary of the English Language. We have the word propriety, the etymology. It starts out meaning fitness, proper character. A later form of the vernacular, propriete, which became English property, also ownership. Bullcrap again, because the United States and no other Europeans own Earth Mother, no parts of her. Question. Is the fictional United States eternal, meaning everlasting, endless, and permanent? Answer. Hell no. Then how delusional and mentally deranged are the writers and upholders of this treaty, especially this part about the U.S. having true and absolute propriety forever. Prior to this bullcrap, these same indigenous people under foreign military force of French Europeans, their rival European U.S. colonizing thieves, coerced these indigenous nations under threat and duress to give the U.S. operators priceless Earth Mother land to have and hold forever, in exchange for 6,000 worthless pieces of paper that belonged to the foreign European colonizers in the first place. Think about it. Also, what's bogus about this, it says, and the undersigned Indians do hereby in their own names and the names of their respective nations and tribes, their heirs and descendants. First of all, the status of Indian does not have heirs and descendants or tribes. It's a fiction. It's a European made-up construct to conveniently lump all Aboriginal Indigenous people into one description and one category. Also to facilitate the land theft, because what they do with this fiction, since they made it up, they step into the shoes of that fiction. That's why you have so many European white people now claiming to be Indians. That's where you got the $5 Indians and everything like that. plus Indian status expires and it can be taken away by their European institution of marriage. Nothing was done in their own names. Second, they put an X mark by something that the foreigners had written on their own paper. Mind you, under threat and duress. There was military force involved, all kinds of coercion, and under these kind of conditions, no one can speak for their respective nations, all their nations, their tribes, their heirs, and their descendants.
Hear this. Once these Europeans got their foot in the door of the Americas, by first pretending to be friends of the Aborigine, as instructed by their Roman Catholic Church, one group of European French, English/British, and Portuguese falsely claimed that they bought, sold, and was given land that the Aboriginal Indigenous never bestowed on these colonizing liars, to other groups of European parasites. Example, in 1762, European, Spain, falsely claimed 828,000 square miles that made up 15 European United States colonies between the Mississippi River and the Rocky Mountains that the French named Louisiana, after their syphilis, disease-riddled, King, Louis XIV of France. In the Foreign Colonial 1787, Articles of Confederation, that is blindly supported by ignorant assimilated indigenous, the Foreign Colonial Senate and House of Representatives of the Foreign United States of America in Congress assembled, the colonizers' government usurped and distributed land of the Aborigine to their other foreign European pale-face white settlers. Get this. In 1803 via Louisiana Purchase Treaty, colonizer, Thomas Jefferson, that the ignorant assimilated civilized indigenous people claim as their founding father, gave European France 15 million worthless dollars for 530 million acres of Aboriginal indigenous lands. By 1812, the 12th colonial United States Congress renamed Louisiana Territory as Missouri Territory in order to avoid confusion with recently stolen land admitted as the Union Colony State of Louisiana. So, now you don't have to wonder why the Aboriginal indigenous people of this land don't have anything, but continue to try and fit in foreign government, and foreign ways, all the while, other foreigners come right on in and set up whatever they want with the approval of the foreign U.S. occupation, like in Israel and Palestine. In the Treaty of 1818, British colonizers named the northern boundary fiction, Rupert's Land. The 1819 Adams-Onis Treaty defined the western boundary fiction, by their Spanish viceroy, as so-called New Spain. The 1862 Homestead Act doled out 160-acre plots of indigenous lands to any group of Europeans that never bore arms against their rival colonizing United States operators. This action was enforced by the Foreign Colonial Congress using the same Foreign Colonial Constitution for the United States of America, that the ignorant assimilated civilized indigenous blindly support, and confidently boasts of the colonizers adopting. Between 1862 and 1904, 500 million acres of indigenous land was dispersed by the Foreign United States General Land Office. These treaties were by Europeans between Europeans. Yet, many Aboriginal indigenous still defend to the teeth that same colonial constitution that they stress must be enforced because the colonizers, that no one trusts, allegedly adopted the constitution from them.
Our constitution opens with the words as straight as it sounds, we the people. Well, it's time to remember that we the people are the government. You and I. Not some force in a distant capital. Not some powerful force we have no control over. It's us.
Poor fools. If the colonial U.S. Constitution was adopted from the indigenous, then why isn't it doing them any good, and the indigenous are still the Europeans' footstool? All the while those same ignoramus are teaching and fighting in favor of their own demise, and the continued underfoot domination of the foreign colonial United States of America operators. Look. Under the de facto and unlawful fascist United States government's own laws for only themselves, these treaty contracts with the Aboriginal Indigenous peoples were never valid. These document papers were null and void at the time of conception, even before the X-Mark Inc. made contact with the paper. Whereby, the handful of so-called purported Aborigine that became civilized Indians by the morally wrong and criminal Europeans, had no authority to give away, or to sell any parts of land of Earth Mother. Even according to the colonizers' own rule of law, one cannot sell or give away what one does not own. This means that one cannot buy from a non-owner either, especially at the exclusion of the millions of other non-consenting, innocent, revolting, and displaced Aborigine having immediate interests in what was happening between the foreign thieves and the few assimilated purported sellers or grantors of the lands, howbeit, outside of the colonizers' jurisdiction or authority of their own land of Europe. The millions of other innocent birthright Aborigine inhabitants all across the land were never involved in the wrongful bargaining and haggling over their inevitable displacement orchestrated by foreign Europeans. Moreover, the handful of X-marking Aborigine being ignorant in the vernacular of the foreign invaders to satisfy comprehension and acceptance of the terms coerced by foreign Europeans, meant that there was no real acceptance or consideration by promise, performance, or property, because the land of Earth Mother is sacred to Aboriginal Indigenous peoples of this land, like burial, and other sites of this land, meaning what is sacred, cannot be bought or sold. Look. The few cherry-picked Aborigine that could not possibly represent the countless clans and tribes of the land that rejected the Europeans' Christian civilization, and have never spoken, nor consented on behalf of the millions of Aborigine clans and tribes that were unaware, and not even present to speak on behalf of their own clans and tribes, could not, nor did they or the X-markers comprehend the foreigners' English, French, Portuguese, Latin, Spanish, etc., languages. The X-mark of the few was forced under threat, duress, coercion, and deception. On top of that, the Aborigine was not made aware of their diabolical and malfeasant intentions, and the colonizing treaty constructors had to instruct them on where and how to make the mark on the paper. The Aborigine could never unconditionally tender the land of Earth Mother to another man, of which Earth Mother, being the principle of nature, does not belong to neither of them.
We'll do one more. Article 6, dealing with the Cherokee, it says, "It is agreed on the part of the Cherokee that the United States shall have the sole and exclusive right of regulating their trade." Article 7. The United States solely guarantee to the Cherokee Nation all their lands not hereby ceded. First of all, Cherokee is not even the nation's name. It's Talaji. So these are all fictions. It's not even real. And so they're giving all of their birthrights over to some foreigners from some other land that came over here, stealing, lying, cheating, stealing, killing, and destroying. Now they're going to regulate who they trade with and what they trade. It's bullcrap. None of these treaties are valid. Not one.
No treaty is valid. Repeat. No treaty is valid between the invading Europeans, now calling themselves American, on the American lands, regardless of when, where, or what year any treaty was made. Europeans cannot enforce their contracts on us by their own law, to the exclusion of nature's law, the Great Spirit, the Great Mystery, the creator of everything seen and unseen, our own creed, regardless of colonizers' fabricated mutual assent, expressed by what they defined for themselves as valid offer and acceptance, adequate consideration, capacity, and legality. So, Aborigine, stop trying to enforce treaties to your own detriment, and reject. Reject them, as non-existent as they are. Black's Law Dictionary Rev. 4th ed. p.27, acceptance under subtitle contract is contract's compliance by offeree, or the one that accepts or does not accept, with terms and conditions of offer would constitute an acceptance. Our ancestors never willingly accepted the foreign white and Moorish man's treaties, evidenced by our revolts, and wars that still go on till this day. There was never any acceptance. Repeat. No acceptance. So stop trying to enforce these foreign diabolical anti-nature treaties to your own detriment, and reject these Roman European treaties as non-existent, as they are. Revive what has always been ours by nature's law.
Of course, Washington doesn't want other countries to talk about the fact that it committed genocide against indigenous peoples. It was founded on settler colonialism and ethnic cleansing, and white supremacy and slavery. It's important to hear those facts.
I love you, Mother Earth.